All right, guys, last one here. Talking about decolonization in South America. Now we know it was a mess in Africa that we heard about. And that one gets a lot of attention in the news today. But South America is another region that was badly plagued with decolonization. We're going to start down on the bottom in Argentina, just like we did with the revolutions with José de San Martín. We're going to go all the way down to the south there. And in the early 1900s, once again complicated by all of the nastiness of the Cold War, we have Argentina. Argentina was one of the wealthiest Latin American nations. It had several very large farming landowners. And things are okay down there until the Great Depression hits. All of a sudden, the things that Argentina supplied became really expensive or nobody needed. And as the Great Depression hits, very similar to everything else that happened in places like Italy and Spain and Germany, a military government will be elected, and it will govern for the next 50 years. And the guy that is going to be the focal point of this is their leader, a guy by the name of President Juan Perón, who in the mid-1940s, right after World War II, is elected president. And what his idea is, he's like, we are going to get rid of all of these multinational corporations. Everybody who has been exploiting us for money, we are going to kick out, and we are going to govern those industries by ourselves. We are going to fix wage increases. We're going to make the people organize labor under our lines. And the problem is all these things that he says sound good, is that when he gets power, he begins to roll them back. And he will survive for a while because of the enormous popularity of his wife, Eva. If you remember a few years ago, if you're familiar with Madonna, she made a movie about Eva Perón. Well, slowly, just like all the other dictators, Juan begins to oppress his opposition. He begins to attack them. He begins to throw them in jail. So just like Rome, as it was falling, all the rich people fled to Byzantium. And the government, just like Lenin and Stalin in the Soviet Union, takes over the industry. And everything goes into a bizarre economic tailspin. And then Eva Perón dies, and everyone loved her, and she kind of legitimized her husband. And so in 1955, 3 years after her death, Juan is kicked out. Problem is, Argentina is in no better shape after he is removed than when he was in it. So for the next 20 years, different military factions will come into and out of power. Juntas or cabuls will be like the Chinese dynastic cycle, as they will go around and around and around. When none of them make things better, the Argentinians will bring back Juan Perón in 1973. He barely gets the job back when he dies in 1974. Once again, it is his wife that helps legitimize him. His new wife, Isabel, everybody seems to like. And she sets a precedent in a very patriarchal world. She becomes the very first woman president in Latin America. Problem is, because she's a woman, it's very hard for her to really take the reins of power. She's resisted at every step, and then she's kicked out in 1976. Where Argentina goes on a very nasty little thing. You know, we talk about the problems after World War II and during World War II in Germany and in Eastern Europe and in China and in the Soviet Union, but nobody really talks about what's called the Dirty War, where 20,000 Argentinian citizens are killed and executed by their own government. It wasn't until the early to mid 1980s was due to foreign pressure that democracy returns. And from 1983 to 1990, a new overhaul went into Argentina as the economy picks back up. So Argentina went through about 100 years of trials and tribulations, and they find a way. Again, it takes a long time. Remember, going back to industrialization, how long it took England, how long it took the United States. It even took Japan 50 years. So Argentina winds up doing pretty good. And this will take us to Nicaragua. Nicaragua will be right in the middle of Central America, just below Honduras. And after World War II, there was all kinds of problems going on in and around Nicaragua. There was still like vestiges over the old landowning nobility going all the way back to the days of the Spanish government. And the military leaders are always going to be in control. There are dictatorships. As a result, most of the people are poor, as the military leaders siphon everything off for themselves and or for the military. And so as the poor people were struggling, they begin to flirt with communism. Well, the United States just simply cannot allow this to happen. So for a 40-50 year period, there are American-backed dictators known as the Somoza family that will rule Nicaragua. Again, the United States turns a blind eye as long as they resist communism. The United States props them up and backs them in power. By the 1970s, things are terrible. So different groups around the country begin to organize opposition. One of the main members of this group are the Anastasio family. Like, look, we think the Somozas are corrupt. We want to get rid of them. And there is a powerful rebel group that is threatening to unseat or to rebel against the Somozas, known as the Sandinistas. Now, they were a nationalistic group. They were all about Nicaragua. And what they wanted to do was, go back old school. Let's streamline the government. Let's give access to education to women and young educated students who knew not only about Western governments, but they also understood ideas like socialism and communism. And with their popular support, they were able to force an election. And in 1979, they elect Mr. Daniel Ortega as their president. Problem is, Ortega is a socialist. He is listening to another Latin American benevolent so-called dictator, Fidel Castro. And he wants to take all the land from the rich people and the wealthy industry and give it to the people. He's a socialist. Well, incoming United States President Ronald Reagan says there's no way we can have this. So he secretly begins to fund the Contras. The Contras are an opposition group to the Sandinistas. So we're kind of playing both sides against the middle here. Now, the American-backed Contras will instigate a civil war. And as always in the civil wars, it is the poor people who are going to suffer. They're going to be trapped in the middle between the fighting units. And the Sandinistas, due to popular support, are able to remain in power for about 8 to 10 years. After that, they realize with the collapse of the Soviet Union, with the continuing problems that Castro was having when the Soviet subsidies ran out, in 1990, they hold their first democratic election. And while it is great, it's a democracy. Democracy takes time to see improvement, and they're still trying to recover to this very day. Which brings us to Mexico. Mexico is in the news a lot, you know, about the wall and immigration and this and in that. Well, going back to the days of imperialism, Mexican general Porfirio Diaz comes to power. All right, he is kicked into power based on the strength and loyalty of his army. And he is going to make all of these outrageous promises to the poor. We're going to help you. We're going to give you your land. We're going to end your suffering. We're going to retune the economy. But man, once he got power, he becomes incredibly corrupt. And he liked to use slogans like order and progress is happening every day. And he'll stay in power for over 40 years. Problem is, most people were afraid to oppose him because he was a military general. But some weren't. There was an old, extremely old Mexican, old money family known as the Maderos. And Francisco, the leader of the family, had studied in the United States, and he runs for president against Diaz, but he loses, so he's exiled. At the same time, in the northern part of Mexico, two bandit heroes, Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata, are leading their own peasant rebel armies against Diaz. They said, we're sick of you, we don't like what you're doing, you have not lived up to your promises. So here is Diaz, and here is Pancho Villa on top and Zapata on the bottom, these kind of roguish, you know, Mexican, I guess, Robin Hoodish heroes. Now, both these guys will support Francisco Madero, as he says that he is going to help out the poor and really help Mexico. So in 1911, Diaz steps down. All right, he quits, he's done, he's out. And Madero is brought back in to fix the situation. He's old, he's wealthy. He has no need to be corrupt because he's already rich, when lo and behold, he is assassinated. Right at the start of World War I, we get a new guy named Venustiano Carranza is going to take control. And he immediately unleashes the Mexican army on the two bandit heroes Zapata and Villa. And while he's hunting them, he proposes a brand new constitution. And he says, we're going to do three simple things, like we're absolute. Number one, we're going to break up the large aristocratic landed estates like Madero has, and we're going to give them to the people. Secondly, it is the Mexican government that should decide what to do with our resources, how much to use, who to give them to. And last but not least, we are going to slow down, or if not eliminate, but really put a stranglehold on foreign business and governmental control inside of Mexico. This will go against the United States Monroe Doctrine, who tells all foreign governments to stay out of the Western Atlantic, as it is the United States' sphere of influence. And the United States had been financing the different Mexican leaders, hoping that they would further American interests. But sending the army after Villa did not make many friends in Mexico for the new leader. And then there was the Zimmerman telegram during World War I, who upsets the United States. So things are not going well for Mexico. And then in 1932, incoming president trying to restore relations with the world after the Roaring '20s comes up with the good neighbor policy. And he says, look guys, I'm going to bring my American troops home from Nicaragua and Haiti, and I'm not going to intervene. You can do whatever you guys want as long as it doesn't harm the United States. We're going to be a good neighbor. If you need help, ask, but we are not going to impose. And so in Mexico, all right, there's the creation of the Institutional Revolutionary Party known as the PIR. And they're going to operate for quite a while until after World War II, when the Cold War affects things once again. but it is the PIR that will be supreme for the next several decades as they try to get the whole team working together. They're almost like Akbar the Great. They want farmers, they want teachers, they want military commanders, they want big business leaders to work together and say what we need to do is increase education for our own people. We need to make sure we have enough doctors and nurses so we get adequate health care and we stay peaceful. We focus on ourselves. And by the 1980s, Japan and the United States look around. They were engaging financial difficulties due to a gas crisis, and they needed access to cheap labor. Well, a place who needed a lot of employment was Mexico. So Japan and the United States made automobiles and electronics. So we can pay the Mexican workers very, very few dollars and then bring our products over the border and make a huge killing. They even satirize it in the movie Ocean's 13, if you've seen the Danny Ocean movies with George Clooney and Brad Pitt. Anyway, in the mid-'80s, an idea known as NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, is dreamt up. And what it is going to do is it is going to lower trade barriers between Canada, the United States, and Mexico, right? It'll create a North American market where the three countries can share resources and ideas without a lot of import taxes and tariffs. It did not really work because Mexico was not in a position to compete with the industrialized United States and Canada. Who it hurts, they say, is United States workers who get laid off as their jobs go down to Mexico. Foreign workers in Asia are laid off, and the only people that benefits are the big business leaders of corporate America, where they take Martin Luther King's Free at Last speech and they turn it to free trade, thank God Almighty, we have free trade. We hire cheap labor and we make a large profit from it, which continues is the big problem in Mexico to this day, along with the drug trade. Which brings us to Haiti. And in Haiti, under Toussaint L'Ouverture, wins freedom from its colonial masters and is today the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. And a lot of it is due to Dr. Francois Duvalier, better known as Papa Doc, who as a doctor said that he was the grandfather to the people. What he does is create a Stalin-esque secret police force that will stamp out and eliminate anybody who chooses to go against him. He will rule until 1971. I remember when he leaves power and his son, Jean-Claude, nicknamed Baby Doc, takes over, and he was even more brutal than his dad. And I distinctly remember him being thrown out of power and all the ills shed the light on his horrible reign in 1986. And this brings us to 1990, when a priest named Jean-Bertrand Aristide says that we live in dignified poverty. We are poor, we struggle, but we're going to hold our heads up high and we are going to work to get better. The problem is there was a lot of factional fighting, a lot of small warlords, and the military echelon takes over. They brutally mistreat opposition, and it takes the United States and the United Nations to intervene to stop killing the government from killing their own citizens. So, as a result, Aristide, who had been banished, is brought back into power, and he's working in that dignified poverty where the massive earthquake and hurricane will devastate the island. As a result, Haiti is still struggling to this very day to gain strength and to get better. There's just all sorts of economic problems in Haiti. To help combat this, there is the OAS, or the Organization of American States, that is created to help promote democracy, to help promote self-rule, and to eliminate the effects of communism in the area, because they saw what happened in places like Cuba and in Venezuela. The United Nations will loan them millions, if not billions of dollars for land reform and education, but we really are still struggling to see the return on that investment. Venezuela with its oil, and Brazil with its lumber and its diverse economy will use their resources to break away from everyone else to try and do their own things, but man, they're still struggling. And so that is decolonization in Latin America, and we're going to pop over to Asia real quick and talk about India and Pakistan, another area that's very volatile. They're both nuclear powers. They don't like each other. There is the role of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and ISIS inside the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. And what we have in India is a sense of nationalism that grows during the 1800s, during the Sepoy Rebellion in England that we talked about. And we have a leader named Muhammad al-Jinnah who says, look, Muslims are in a minority position here in India. I would like our own separate Islamic state. All right? He happens to be head of the Arab League. The Arabic Islamic nations have their own version of like the Organization of American States. And once again, we fall back to World War II, and England says, you know what? All right, we're going to agree to independence. And England does all kinds of crazy things, like redrawing boundaries, like in Iraq, where they put 4 different groups who can't stand each other in one country. Well, England agrees. And when the map is drawn up, riots break out, and England says, okay, look, we get it. We're going to fast forward this, and we're going to get it done right away. But their borders are not real equal. Hindus and Muslims had lived side by side for decades, and now Muslims live in Pakistan and Hindus live in India. So if your religion was across the new border that England drew up, you had to move. Well, you lost your job, you may have lost your house. And in 1947, as hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people close in on the borders, violence breaks out. They begin to attack each other. And it forces millions of people to flee their homes. But there is one great Jedi who is standing in there preaching peace. And it is his assassination, the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, who was saying, look, we need to forget about England. We need to forget about our own economic troubles and work together. When Gandhi is assassinated, it discredits the radicals on both sides. The common people take over. And India and Pakistan will split. And it will be a guy named Netanyahu who is going to rule for a very, very, very long time until Gandhi's daughter and grandson are going to take over, but they are going to wind up being assassinated. And so it is, still politically tense between the two countries to this very day. Another problem we have with decolonization in the Middle East is the oil-producing countries of the Middle East, especially the creation of OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. The problem is, what exactly do we do here? What exactly do we do with these guys. The area was rich in oil, and many of these guys have been exploited ever since, yeah, I was trying to think of the leader of India's name. I cannot pronounce his first name, Jarwal, as I do, but it is Nehru, N-E-H-R-U. I had a mind blank there for a second. I apologize. So, in 1973, the countries in the Middle East who had, were supposed to be getting economic assistance and aid because of their oil realized that there is a problem, that they could use oil as a weapon. It was the Western countries who owned all the banks, and they owned all the oil producing technology that they were using to take over and dominate the region. The people weren't getting anything from it. And it turns out that the small populated countries had a lot of oil and they got rich, while the large, densely populated countries had a little bit of oil and they fall behind. And again, England draws up boundaries like Iraq just to exploit the land and the oil. So these blue countries, from Ecuador to Venezuela, Nigeria, Algeria, Libya, especially Iran, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE have a ton of oil. So Western countries love them so they can get access to cheap oil. And then OPEC realizes that if they shut off the flow of oil, they can use it as a weapon. And the industrial economies like the United States, Great Britain, France depend on oil. So this is a gas line. I remember these in the mid-1970s waiting for my dad in a gas line because there was a shortage, right? And the way it worked out in my area is odd license plates ending in an even number could get gas Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and odd numbers could go Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And the problem is that it backfires on the OPEC countries, because when they did that, it ground the entire world economy to a halt, and they couldn't get the services that they need. And so we're going to focus on this area when it comes to a microcosm of this as to what happens in Iran. In Iran, the guy on the left has been in power for a long time. He's known as the Shah of Iran. Now, he was horribly a spoiled rich kid and corrupt, but he was a United States-backed dictator, right? And we, again, turned a blind eye, the United States, to what he was doing as long as he got rid of the communists. Everybody from the United States to the Soviet Union to England wanted Iran because it had a massive field of oil that was found in 1970. Well, when the Shah is going to the Cleveland Clinic for a cancer treatment, a fundamentalist imam, ulama, the Ayatollah Khomeini takes over. He says the Shah was not following true Islam. And so the Iranians will storm the American embassy, and they will take 126 hostages for 444 days, as the Ayatollah wants to export what he calls the Islamic Iranian revolution. Ever since that time, even if you're reading the news today with the bombs going on in the ships on the Strait of Hormuz, tensions, no one in the region really likes Iran. And so there's just they are the minority sect of Muslims. They are Shia or Shiite Muslims, and there is a lot of destabilization going on. As a result, it is a hot spot, and they have had a tense relation with the West ever since the Ayatollah Khomeini. So throughout the area, whether it's from Eastern Europe, Asia, down into Afghanistan, over into Europe, there is a lot of genocides. Like Keir was talking about Uganda, the other day. And there is a genocide is basically an intentional attempt to eliminate somebody either along religious or ethnic lines. We don't like them because they're Muslim or Catholic or they're Pakistani or they're Indian or whatever. The other group wants to eliminate them. And so in Armenia, we have a bunch of Christians who will be attacked and killed by Turkish Muslims going back to the Ottoman Empire. We know of the Jewish Holocaust that took place in World War II. And in Africa, in especially Rwanda, I think we talked about this in an earlier lesson, there are the Rwandan Tutsis who are killed, a minority who are killed by the Hutu majority. And like Don Cheadle made an excellent movie about this. And by the mid-90s, over 1 million people were killed. This genocide is still affecting many other regions of the world to this day. The one that gets the most attention is in the Sudan or Darfur, however you refer to it, where some of the Sudanese Liberation Army did not like how their peasants were being treated. It's exactly kind of like China back in the day. The government did not like being told by this new political group, so they go in and they get Arabic Muslims, militia known as Janjaweeds, or if you translated it, devils on horseback. They're Muslims, they're Arabic, they're not African, and they just ravage villages, causing 2.5 million refugees after they kill 400,000 people. That's 3 million people affected by their own government. And part of the reason this happens is due to the collapse of the Soviet Union. This is your last lesson. We are going to pick up here in a few minutes. And hopefully you guys will enjoy it. It's kind of long, so I'm going to begin a separate video as a result.